me the truth," Mafia boss demanded, then pulled the shaking waitress into his car. The smell of stale coffee and bleach was the perfume of Lena Mendez's life. It clung to her apron, her hair, and the cramped one-bedroom apartment she returned to in the dark. She worked at the Red Line Diner, a 24-hour box of fluorescent lights and cracked vinyl booths pressed against the city's gray, unforgiving edge. For 8 months, she'd been a ghost in a white uniform, memorizing orders for burnt toast and black coffee. Her movements quiet, her eyes perpetually downcast. Lena was a creature of shadows, and she cultivated her invisibility with a desperate, breathing vigilance. She was 26, but the anxiety that rode her shoulders made her feel ancient. It was a physical weight, a constant hum beneath her skin that spiked into a cold siren's wail at any sudden noise, a door slamming, a plate dropping, the sharp cry of a police siren in the distance. She avoided attention. She avoided conflict, most of all. She avoided the men who wore uniforms and the men who wore $3,000 suits with the same unsettling authority. Tonight. The diner was slow, the clock above the pass ticking past 11:30. Only a few stray night shift workers nursed their cups, the rain outside streaking the glass. Lena moved between tables, refilling sugar, wiping rings of condensation. She felt the shift in the air before she heard the door. The bell chimed, a tinny, cheerful sound that was immediately smothered by the heavy presence of the men who entered. There were 7 of them. They didn't come in to eat. They came in to own the space. 4 of them were loud, dressed in dark leather and smelling of expensive cologne and damp wool. They laughed, sharp and barking, and slapped each other on the back. Romanos. Lena knew the name. The way everyone in this part of the city knew it. They were the disease. The other 3 were different. They were quiet. Their suits were Italian, cut to perfection, moving with them like a second skin. They were Vescari men. They were the surgeons. They moved to a booth in the back, their movements economical, their eyes scanning the room, dismissing the other customers, and landing, with cold assessment, on the Romanos. Lena's heart hammered against her ribs. Her shift was over in 30 minutes. She just had to make it 30 minutes. Look at this. One of the Romano men, a broad-shouldered man with a gaudy gold watch, said loudly, gesturing to the Vescari booth. "They let the undertakers in. You boys lost?" One of the Vescari men, a silver-haired older man, simply stared back. "We're just having coffee. Rico, unless you own the coffee now, too." "We own the block," Rico sneered, "and everything on it, including the trash." It escalated from there, the way it always did. The voices rose, the insults becoming more specific, more personal. Lena tried to hide in the kitchen, but her boss, a sweaty man named Sal, pushed her out. "Go take their order. Lena, get 'em coffee. Calm 'em down." "Sal, I can't," she whispered, her hands starting to shake. "Just do it." She grabbed a pot of coffee, her feet like lead, but before she could reach the table, the verbal clash became a physical one. Rico threw his spoon. The silver-haired Vescari man stood, his chair scraping violently. "Outside," the Vescari man said, his voice a low growl. "Not in front of the civilians." Rico laughed. "Civilians? Look at this place. What civilian comes here?" But they moved, a surge of dark coats and tense shoulders, pushing through the glass door and spilling onto the rain-slicked pavement. Lena sagged against the counter, her breath catching. Sal was already on the phone, his voice a high-pitched squeak. Lena knew he wasn't calling the police. He was calling his distributor, complaining about the broken plates. Then, through the window, she saw it. The fight outside was a mess of shadows and shoving, but in the back alley, between the diner and the neighboring laundromat, a small figure was hiding, a boy. He couldn't have been more than 8 or 9, wearing a dark blue pea coat, his eyes wide and terrified. He was pressed against the brick, trying to make himself small, watching the men fight. One of the Romano men was shoved backward, hard, stumbling toward the alley. Lena didn't think. The anxiety that usually paralyzed her was eclipsed by a different, sharper instinct. She ran to the back door, the one that led to the alley. "Hey," she yelled, her voice thin. The boy, Nico Vescari, though she didn't know his name, looked at her. He was trapped. The man stumbling toward him. Rico had pulled something from his waistband. It was dark. It was metal. Lena moved. She burst through the back door, grabbed the boy by the front of his coat, and hauled him behind a stack of empty plastic milk crates. "Get down," she hissed, shoving his head down with one hand and covering his small body with her own, her waitress apron becoming a flimsy shield. She squeezed her eyes shut. The gunshots were deafening. 3. Fast. Pop, pop, pop. The sound was sharp, final, cutting through the night. Then came the shouting, the screech of tires, and a terrible, ringing silence. Lena was shaking so hard she thought her teeth would crack. She was pressed against the grimy brick, the smell of gunpowder and wet garbage filling her lungs. The boy beneath her wasn't crying. He was perfectly, unnervingly still. "It's okay," she whispered, though she wasn't sure if it was, "They're gone." She slowly uncurled herself. The silver-haired man from the Vescari group was lying on the pavement. The Romanos were gone. The other 2 Vescari men were already kneeling by their fallen comrade, one pressing his hands to the man's chest, the other on the phone. His voice, a venomous hiss. The boy, Nico, scrambled out from under her and ran to one of the men. "Uncle?" Lena didn't stay to hear the answer. She backed away, slipped through the rear door of the diner, and locked it. She ripped off her apron, grabbed her bag from the locker, and fled out the front, not even clocking out. She ran 3 blocks, her lungs burning, before she finally ducked into the shadows of a bus shelter, her heart trying to escape her chest. Dante Vescari arrived 20 minutes later. The police were there, but they kept their distance, their blue and red lights painting the scene in a grotesque, flashing carnival. Dante's arrival was a vacuum. He sucked the sound and light out of the air. He was tall, dressed in a black, custom-tailored suit that fit him like armor. His face was granite, his dark eyes holding a cold, still burning rage. His nephew, Nico, was sitting in the back of an armored Escalade, pale but unharmed. His men were handling the body. "The footage," Dante said to Sal, who was wringing his hands by the diner door. It was not a request. Sal scrambled to the back office. Dante followed, his underboss, Marco, at his side. They watched the grainy, black and white feed. They saw the Romanos enter. They saw the fight. They saw his man, Angelo, go down. Then, Dante pointed. "Rewind that! The back alley!" He watched the footage again. He saw the waitress, the one he'd barely registered at the counter, bolt out the back door. He saw her grab his nephew. He saw her cover Nico with her own body, a second before Rico fired the shots that killed Angelo. Dante watched it a 3rd time. He watched her face, pale and terrified, but her hands were firm as she shoved Nico's head down. She had not hesitated. "Who is she?" he asked Sal. "Lena. Lena Mendez. She's just a waitress. Started 8 months ago. Keeps to herself. Please, Mr. Vescari. We didn't see nothing." Dante ignored him. He walked out of the diner, his mind working. The woman had saved his nephew's life, but she had also seen a Vescari Caporigine get gunned down, and she had run from the scene. He didn't like witnesses, and he didn't like people who ran. Lena waited until 2 in the morning for her bus. She was soaked, her cheap sneakers squelching. The adrenaline had worn off, leaving her hollow and sick. She just wanted her apartment, her locks, her darkness. A black Bentley, sleek and silent as a shark, pulled up to the curb. The tinted rear window glided down. Dante Vescari's face was illuminated by the weak streetlight. He looked at her, his expression unreadable. "You're wet. Get in. I'll give you a ride." His voice was deep, a low rumble that vibrated in the damp air. Lena's blood turned to ice. It was him. The man from the footage? The man everyone feared. This was the attention she had spent her life avoiding. "No, thank you," she said, her voice a reedy whisper. She took a step back. "It wasn't a request," he said, his voice hardening, not with anger, but with absolute certainty. Lena took another step back. Then she turned and fled. She ran down the dark, cracked pavement, not looking back, expecting the sound of footsteps, of the car door opening, but there was nothing. Only the sound of her own ragged breathing and the thud of her feet hitting the wet concrete. She didn't stop running until she was at her 4th floor walk-up, fumbling with the keys, her hands shaking so badly it took 3 tries to get the deadbolt undone. She slammed the door, locked all 3 locks, and jammed her only sturdy chair under the knob. She slid down the door, her body finally giving in to the tremors. She had been seen. She had gotten involved. She had been noticed by the one man in the city she should have never, ever crossed. She sat in the dark for an hour, unmoving, finally, exhausted. She crawled into bed, still in her damp clothes. She woke to a sound, a faint scraping. She sat up, her heart leaping into her throat. It was just before dawn, the gray light of the city filtering through her thin curtains. The sound came again. Scrape, scrape, from her front door. She crept out of bed, grabbing the small, heavy flashlight she kept on her nightstand. She padded to the door, her ear pressed against the cheap wood. She heard footsteps receding down the hall. Then she looked down. A small, white slip of paper had been pushed under the door. Her hands trembled as she bent to pick it up. It was a flimsy piece of receipt paper. Written on it in black, block letters, were 5 simple words. "We saw what you did." The next day, she went to work. She had to. Rent was due. She had $37 to her name. Fear was a luxury she couldn't afford. She was jumpy, dropping a tray of glasses, her hands shaking so badly she could barely pour coffee. Every time the diner bell chimed, she flinched. At 2 in the afternoon, it chimed, and he walked in. Dante Viscari. He didn't look like he belonged. The diner was garish in the daylight, and he was a creature of expensive shadows. He took the booth in the back, the one his men had sat in the night before. He didn't look at the menu. He just watched her. Finally, she had no choice. She approached the table, her notepad in her hand. "Coffee?" she whispered. "We need to talk," he said. His voice was quiet, but it cut through the diner's clatter. "I have to work." "About last night?" Lena shook her head, her throat closing. "I didn't see anything. You saw my nephew. You saved him. And you saw my man, Angelo, die." She said nothing, just gripped her notepad. "Why did you run?" he asked. Not angry. Curious. It was worse than anger. I was scared." Dante's eyes narrowed. He looked at her. Really looked at her. At the shadows under her eyes, the ingrained fear in her posture. And he looked at her hands. Her knuckles were white on the notepad, and her fingers were trembling. A visible, uncontrollable vibration. "You're shaking," he observed, as if commenting on the weather. "You're not just scared. Lena Mendez. You're terrified. What are you running from?" "I have to get back to work," she mumbled, and fled to the kitchen, the smell of his cologne, something dark and spicy, following her. He didn't leave. He sat in that booth for another hour, drinking black coffee, his presence a heavy weight in the room, when he finally stood and put a $100 bill on the table. She felt like she could breathe for the first time, but as he passed the counter, he paused. "I'll see you later," he said, and it sounded like a promise. Her shift ended at 11. She was sick with dread. She asked Sal if she could leave early, but he just grunted and pointed to the dirty tables. When she finally pushed open the diner door, the night air was cold. She decided to take the long way home, avoiding the alley. She made it 2 blocks. A dark van, one she didn't recognize, screeched to a halt beside her. 2 men in black ski masks jumped out. Lena screamed, a sound she hadn't realized she was holding in. She tried to run, but they were on her. One grabbing her arms, the other clamping a hand over her mouth that stank of cigarettes and cheap leather. "Shut up! You're coming with us. Romano sends his regards." They were dragging her toward the van, her feet scraping on the pavement. She was losing. This was it. The end she had always known was coming. Headlights, blinding. A horn blasted, not a tap, but a sustained, furious roar. A black Bentley mounted the curb, its engine revving like a lion. The van's driver, seeing the car, slammed on the gas and peeled out, leaving the 2 masked men stranded. They looked at the Bentley, at the man getting out of the driver's side, and pure, undiluted panic crossed their faces. They dropped Lena and ran, disappearing into the dark alleys. Dante Viscari didn't even look at them. He strode toward her. Lena was on the ground, on her hands and knees, hyperventilating, the taste of gutter water and fear in her mouth. He didn't offer her a hand. He didn't ask if she was all right. He grabbed her by the arm, his grip a steel band, and hauled her to her feet. He wrenched open the passenger door of the Bentley and practically threw her inside. He was in the driver's seat a second later, the doors locking with a heavy, final thunk. The car was silent, filled only with the sound of her gasping, terrified breaths. She was trembling from head to toe, a violent, uncontrollable quake. Dante didn't start the car. He just sat there, his hands on the wheel, staring straight ahead, his jaw so tight she could see the muscle jump. Finally. He turned his head. His eyes were not cold now. They were blazing, a dark, consuming fire. He leaned in, his proximity suffocating her, his scent of wool and spice and pure, male danger filling her lungs. "Tell me the truth," he growled, his voice a low, dangerous command. The silence in the Bentley was louder than her screams had been. It was a thick, heavy blanket of expensive leather, polished wood, and the man's controlled, simmering anger. Lena was pressed against the passenger door, as far as she could get, her hands balled into fists in her lap, her nails digging crescents into her palms. The trembling had not subsided. It was a deep-seated ague that shook her from her bones. He was staring at her, his dark eyes stripping her bare. "Tell me the truth," he repeated, the words a low vibration in the small space. Lena squeezed her eyes shut, the image of the ski masks and the stench of cigarettes flooding her senses. "The truth about what?" she whispered, her voice cracking. "I don't know anything. I saw a little boy. I helped him. That's all." "That is not all." Dante's voice was dangerously soft. "Romanos don't snatch waitresses off the street for seeing a little boy. They were sent for you. That threat this morning. We saw what you did. You helped my nephew. Who are they to threaten you for that?" Her mind was a white noise of panic. He knew about the note. Of course he knew. He knew everything. "I don't know," she lied, the words tasting like ash. I just did what any decent person would. I didn't know he was your nephew. I didn't know any of it." Dante Vescari stared at her for a long, agonizing minute. He saw the lie, but he also saw the unfeigned, paralyzing terror. She was a rabbit caught in a snare, shaking so hard she couldn't even think to chew off her own foot. This was not the fear of someone caught in a lie. This was the fear of something much, much older. With a low, frustrated sound, he turned away from her and started the car. The engine was a quiet, powerful purr, the opposite of the violence that had just occurred. He pulled the car smoothly off the curb and into the empty street. Where are you taking me?" she stammered. "Home." The word was a shock. He drove through the dark streets with an unnerving calm, his large hands resting lightly on the wheel. Lena watched the city pass, a blur of neon and concrete, her reflection in the window a pale, haunted mask. She lived in a fourth-floor walk-up in a building that smelled of mold and boiled cabbage. He was going to drop her right back in the lion's den. He pulled up to her corner, the Bentley looking like a spaceship that had landed in the wrong neighborhood. He didn't cut the engine. "Go up. Lock your door. Don't open it for anyone." She fumbled with the door handle, her fingers numb. "Thank you," she whispered. "Not for the ride, but for not asking any more questions." "I wasn't asking," he said, his eyes on the rearview mirror. She scrambled out and ran to her building, not looking back. She didn't see the black sedan that had been trailing them, which now parked across the street. She didn't see Dante make a quick, sharp call. "She's inside. 2 men on the door, 2 on the roof. I want to know if she so much as sneezes, and find out who those Romano rats were. I want their names." Lena made it inside, her body screaming with relief. She jammed the chair under the knob, her heart still a frantic bird in her chest. The apartment was cold, silent, but the silence didn't feel safe. It felt thin, like a layer of ice over a dark, deep lake. She grabbed her phone, a cheap, untraceable burner, and went into the closet, pulling the door shut behind her. She sat on the floor, surrounded by her few threadbare clothes, and dialed the number she knew by heart. It rang 5 times. "Hello?" The voice on the other end was sleepy, young. "Sophia," Lena breathed, and the tears she'd been holding back finally came, hot and silent. "Lena? Oh my God, what's wrong? Is it him? Did he find you?" No, Lena sobbed, pressing a hand to her mouth to quiet the sound. "I'm okay, I needed to hear your voice. Are you safe? Is everything okay?" "I'm fine. Lena, I'm still at the university. Same dorm. No one's looked for me. What happened?" "Nothing. Things are complicated here. I need you to promise me something. Sophia, stay hidden. Don't use your real name on anything. Don't post pictures, please. I know you want a normal life, but he's powerful. The people I'm hiding from, they're not just one man." "Lena, what did you do?" Her sister's voice was sharp with fear. "I'm protecting us," Lena said fiercely. "I'm keeping us safe. Just be careful. I love you. I love you too. Be safe, Elena." The name hung in the air. Elena Costa, the name she was born with. Lena Mendez was a ghost, a name bought from a man in an alley for $200. She hung up, the ache in her chest a familiar, hollow pain. She'd been running for 8 months, and she was so tired. Meanwhile, in an office that smelled of old leather and cigar smoke, Dante Vescari hung up his own phone. "Nothing," his underboss, Marco Gallo, said. "The name Lina Mendez doesn't exist. No social, no driver's license, no credit history. She started at the diner 8 months ago. Cash payroll. The apartment is a sublet. Paid in cash. She's a ghost. And before that," Dante swirled the amber liquid in his glass. "Before that, we found a whisper. A waitress in a different district. Looked like her. Different hair. Used the name Elena Costa. She vanished from that job the same week a Romano associate named Luca Morelli got into some trouble." Dante's eyes narrowed. Luca Morelli. The hothead. The one they called the Prince. "The same," Marco confirmed. "She's running from him. Or she's a plant for him," Dante countered. Though he didn't believe it, the fear he'd seen in her eyes was not manufactured. "Either way," Marco said, "she's a problem. She saved Nico, yes, but she's brought Romano's eyes to your door. Get rid of her." Dante was silent. He thought of her, trembling in his car, refusing to brake, insisting she'd just done what any decent person would. "No," he said, his voice final. "Not yet. Double the watch on her building. I want to know what Morelli's play is." Lena didn't sleep. She sat in the dark, watching the sliver of light under her door, waiting for a shadow to pass, for the sound of another footstep. Dawn came, painting her tiny apartment in a weak, gray light. Exhaustion finally claimed her, and she dozed, fitfully on the couch, her flashlight still clutched in her hand. She woke to a smell, coppery, metallic, thick. She sat up, her heart pounding. The smell was coming from the hallway. She crept to the door, her breath held. She listened. Nothing. She slowly, agonizingly, moved the chair. She unlocked the deadbolts one by one. She opened the door a crack, and she screamed. It was her door, but it was covered in blood. Not a splash, but smears, as if someone had painted it with their hands and carved into the center of the wood, deep and vicious, was a single word: liar. She stumbled back, her hand flying to her mouth, a choked, animal sound of terror tearing from her throat. She fell against the wall, her legs giving out, sliding to the floor. She couldn't breathe. This was it. They were here. They knew. Her phone, the cheap burner, rang. The sound made her jump. A sharp, painful shock. She stared at it. It was an unknown number. It rang again. She picked it up, her hand shaking so badly she almost dropped it. "Hello? I'm downstairs." Dante's voice. Not a question, a statement. "Pack a bag." "What? How?" "My men saw the door. You have 5 minutes." The line went dead. 5 minutes. She was still staring at the phone when she heard the footsteps. Not in the hall, in her apartment. She looked up. He was standing in her open doorway, having moved so silently she hadn't heard him. He filled the frame, a dark, imposing figure against the bloody backdrop of her door. His eyes took in the scene in a single, cold glance. The blood. her small, terrified form on the floor, the chair she used as a barricade. "I said pack a bag," he said, his voice flat. "I'm not going anywhere with you," she whispered. Though the words were a lie, she had nowhere else to go. "Yes, you are," he said. He stepped inside, his presence shrinking her tiny apartment to the size of a box. "You have two choices. You can walk out of here with me, or I can have my men carry you out. But either way, you are leaving." Pride. What little she had left warred with the overwhelming, suffocating fear, the blood on the door. That was a promise. A promise of what they would do to her when they found her. Fear won. It wasn't even a contest. She stood on wobbly legs, grabbed her backpack, and shoved in her only change of clothes, her toothbrush, and the picture of her sister she kept hidden in a book. He watched her, his expression impassive. He didn't rush her, he just waited. A pillar of dark, patient power. When she was done, she slung the bag over her shoulder. "Okay," he nodded once. He put a hand on her lower back, a light, impersonal touch that was anything but. It was a brand, a claim. It guided her out of the apartment, past the desecrated door and down the stairs. His men, two in suits, were waiting in the lobby. They nodded at him, their eyes scanning the street. He led her to the Bentley and opened the door. This time, she got in without a fight. The drive was silent. He took her not to a mansion, not to a dark warehouse, but to the heart of the city. They pulled into a private underground garage, and he led her to an elevator. He pressed his thumb to a biometric scanner, and the doors slid open to a private car. The elevator moved, fast and silent, rising for what felt like a full minute. The doors opened directly into a penthouse. Lena's breath caught. It was a palace of glass and steel, 2 stories high, with a view that encompassed the entire city. The lights twinkled below them like a carpet of fallen stars. It was beautiful, sterile, and as inescapable as a prison. "You'll be safe here," he said, walking to the vast kitchen. "No one gets in without me." "Safe," she repeated, the words sounding foreign. She walked to the window, placing a hand on the cool glass. She was so high up. He was in the kitchen, and she heard the sound of a pot being filled, of a cabinet opening. He was cooking. She turned. He was standing by a marble island, a bag of pasta in one hand, his suit jacket now off, his white shirt sleeves rolled up to his forearms. The sight was so incongruous, so bizarrely domestic, that she almost laughed. "You're hungry," he said. He made pasta, a simple aglio e olio, the scent of garlic and olive oil filling the sterile air, making it feel, for a moment, almost human. He placed a bowl in front of her at the island. She stared at it. She hadn't eaten she couldn't remember. "Eat," he commanded, but his voice was softer now. She ate. She ate like a starving animal, the food a warm, comforting balm in her raw throat. He didn't eat. He just leaned against the counter, nursing a glass of dark red wine, and watched her. "You're not a ghost," he said finally. "You're Elena Costa." She froze, the fork halfway to her mouth, the blood drained from her face. "You're 22 years old. Your sister is Sophia. You've been running for 8 months, ever since you left your job at the trattoria in the 5th Ward, the one owned by Luca Morelli." She put the fork down, her hands shaking again. "Please," she whispered. "I don't bring people into my world, Elena," he said, his voice a low rumble. He set the wine glass down and walked toward her. "I don't bring them into my home. You are the first. You are a problem. You are a witness to my man's murder. You are being hunted by my enemies, and you saved my nephew's life. I don't know whether to protect you or kill you." He was in front of her now, his body caging her against the island. "So you are going to do what I asked," he said, his voice dropping. "You are going to tell me the truth. Why is Luca Morelli, a Romano associate, trying to kill you?" The tears came then, hot and thick, spilling over, the pasta, the wine, the surreal safety of the penthouse. It all broke her. The dam of fear she'd been holding back for 8 months shattered. "I was engaged to him," she choked out, the words ripped from her. "It was arranged by my father. But Luca, he was not what he seemed. Dante's expression didn't change, but his eyes darkened. He was possessive, she whispered, a visible shudder running through her. And then he got violent. I tried to leave, but he said I was his. He said I would never leave. I was trapped. I was planning to run, to take Sophia and disappear. And then I saw something. What did you see? I can't, she sobbed, covering her face. He'll kill me. He'll kill Sophia. He won't, Dante said, his voice absolute. He'll have to get through me. She looked up at him then, her eyes blurred with tears, her face a mask of raw, unfiltered despair. I saw him in the back room of the restaurant. He was hurting someone, and he killed him. He killed him, and he laughed. I saw it. I ran. I just ran. I took what cash I had. I got my sister out, and I ran. She broke down completely, her body sagging, the sobs racking her small frame. Dante didn't move for a long second. Then slowly, as if testing the gesture, he raised his hand. He didn't pat her back. He didn't hush her. He cupped her face. His hands were large, warm, and slightly rough. His thumbs moved to her cheeks, brushing under her eyes, catching the tears. The gesture was so unexpectedly gentle, so tender, that it stopped her breath. She stared at him, her sobs hitching. He was so close. She could see the flecks of gold in his dark, intense eyes. He smelled of wine and that spicy, male scent that was purely him. And she, in a move that shocked her as much as it did him, leaned into his touch. She pressed her wet cheek into his palm, a desperate animal need for comfort, for warmth, for a solid presence in her collapsing world. His body went rigid, his eyes widened, just fractionally. She didn't care. She was so tired of being strong, of being scared. She felt the calluses on his palm, a grounding, real sensation. She closed her eyes. He didn't pull away. His other hand came up, cradling her face, holding her as if she were a piece of fragile, priceless glass. He was going to say something. He was going to tell her she was safe. But the words didn't come. She opened her eyes. He was looking at her mouth, and she knew. In that split second, what was going to happen, and she wanted it. She needed it. She needed to be anchored. She rose on her toes, a tiny, hesitant movement. It was all the permission he needed. He met her halfway. The kiss was slow, it was hesitant, it was a question. His lips were firm, warm, and they just brushed hers, a simple, chaste press. It was her first kiss in over a year. It was her first kiss that wasn't born of fear, and then she pressed back. All the fear of the last 8 months, the loneliness, the terror, the grief. It all poured into that simple, desperate movement. Her hands came up, not to grab him, but to clutch the front of his shirt, her fists tightening in the expensive cotton. A sound rumbled in his chest, a low growl. The hunger she had shown, that tiny, desperate spark, lit a fire in him. His control, the ironclad discipline that ruled his life, snapped. The kiss changed. It was no longer a question. It was an answer. It was a claim. His mouth slanted over hers, hard and demanding. His hands slid from her face, one entangling in her hair, tilting her head back, the other wrapping around her small waist, yanking her flush against his hard body. He lifted her, seating her on the marble island, caging her between his powerful thighs. It was not gentle. It was ravenous. It was full of months of her fear and his control, both of them breaking at the same time. She wasn't a ghost. She was a woman. She was real. And she was in his arms. He devoured her mouth, his tongue sweeping inside, tasting the salt of her tears and the garlic from the pasta. She didn't fight. She kissed him back with the same raw, desperate energy. This was not love. It was survival. It was an anchor in a storm, a fire in the cold. He broke the kiss, his breathing ragged, his forehead pressed to hers. His eyes were closed, his jaw tight, as if fighting a war with himself. "Dante," she whispered, her voice a ruin. He didn't speak. He bent, sliding one arm under her knees, the other behind her back, and lifted her from the counter. She was light, a feather in his arms. She wrapped her arms around his neck, burying her face in the crook of his neck, breathing him in. He didn't take her to the bedroom. He carried her to the massive black leather couch in front of the wall of glass. He sat down, arranging her in his lap, her body curled against his, her head on his chest. He held her. He just held her, his hand stroking her hair, his body a warm, solid wall against the cold night. Lena listened to the steady, strong beat of his heart under her ear. It was the only sound in the penthouse, the only sound in the world. "You're safe now, Elena," he whispered into her hair, his voice rough with an emotion she couldn't name. "You're safe." And for the first time in 8 months, wrapped in the arms of the most dangerous man in the city. She believed it. Lena woke with a gasp. The phantom feeling of falling, ripping her from sleep. She was on the leather couch, her neck stiff, her mouth dry. Sunlight, bright and merciless, streamed through the glass walls of the penthouse, illuminating dust motes, dancing in the sterile air. She was alone. A thick, cashmere blanket, the color of charcoal, was draped over her. She hadn't had it when she fell asleep in his arms. The thought that he had, at some point in the night, risen from the chair he must have taken and covered her. It was a small, quiet kindness that felt more dangerous than his anger. Her clothes were a rumpled, grimy mess, a stark contrast to the immaculate, cold perfection of the room. She felt like a piece of garbage brought in from the street. She needed a bathroom. She needed water. She slid off the couch, her feet padding silently on the cold marble floor. The penthouse was vast, a cathedral of silence. "Dante?" she called, her voice a small, lost sound. No answer. She walked past the kitchen, her reflection a pale ghost in the dark, reflective granite. She pushed open a door, thinking it a hallway, and found herself in his office. It was the lion's den. Dark wood, the scent of old leather and something spicy. His scent, a massive desk, carved from what looked like a single piece of mahogany, dominated the room, facing the city view. It was immaculate, orderly, controlled, except for one thing. A single manila file lay open on the blotting pad, as if he'd been interrupted. She knew she shouldn't. It was a violation. It was stupid. But her entire life had been defined by what she didn't know. Survival meant knowing. Her feet moved on their own. She told herself she was just looking for the bathroom. She was a bad liar, even to herself. She reached the desk. The file contained surveillance photos. The first few were men she didn't recognize. Men in expensive suits, getting into cars, shaking hands. She recognized the Romano name on a typed-out label. Then, her blood turned to ice. It was her. A grainy picture, taken from across the street. She was leaving the Red Line Diner, her cheap coat pulled tight, her head down, walking toward the bus stop. She looked haunted. She looked at the date stamp in the corner. 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks. Long before the shooting. Long before he rescued her. Long before he held her. The safety she'd felt in his arms curdled into a cold, bitter acid in her stomach. He had been watching her. All of it, the ride, the protection, the questions. It wasn't a rescue. It was an interrogation. She wasn't a person he'd saved. She was a target he'd acquired. "I was looking for the bathroom," she said, her voice shaking with a new kind of rage. Dante was standing in the doorway. He was in fresh clothes, a dark, perfectly tailored suit, his hair still damp from a shower. He held 2 white ceramic mugs of coffee. The image of domesticity was so false it made her want to scream. He didn't move. His eyes flicked from her face, to the file, to the photo in her hand. His expression didn't change, but his eyes, the ones that had been so warm and protective last night, were now flat and hard as onyx. "That is my private office," he said, his voice a low, cold statement. "You were watching me," she accused, her voice rising. She held up the photo, her hand trembling. 2 weeks ago, this was before the diner, before your nephew. You were already watching me." He set the coffee mugs down on a nearby console. He didn't deny it. Yes. The simple, unadorned truth was a slap in the face. "You were engaged to Luca Morelli," he stated, as if that explained everything. "My business is knowing. I watch anyone and anything that touches the Romano syndicate. You were a person of interest." "A person of interest?" she repeated, the words tasting like poison. "Or a target. What was this all for? Dante?" "Last night, the pasta, the kiss." Was that just part of the interrogation? Getting the person of interest to talk? He moved then, crossing the room in 2 long, silent strides. He stopped inches from her, forcing her to tilt her head back. He was a mountain, and she was a speck. "You think I did that for information?" he asked, his voice a dangerous, quiet rumble. The anger was back. Not the hot rage from the night, but a cold, deadly pressure. "You think I would ever—" "I don't know what to think," she cried, shoving at his chest, a useless, weak gesture that he ignored. "You lied to me. You pretended to be a savior. But you were just another man pulling my strings." "I never lied," he bit out, his hands clenching at his sides. "I'm investigating your past because it's a threat. Morelli is a threat. I needed to know if you were part of that or if you were just another victim." "And what did you decide?" she spat. "I decided," he said, his voice dropping, "that you were a victim. And after last night, I decided it didn't matter. I was going to protect you anyway." The confession hung in the air, but it was interrupted by the sharp, metallic ring of his phone. He turned his back on her, a sharp, dismissive gesture, and answered it. "What?" His tone was clipped. "Say it again. No. Hold." He hung up, his jaw tight. "Stay here." He walked out of the office. Lena's heart was hammering. She sank into his massive leather chair, her rage deflating, leaving her hollow and shaking. She'd been a fool to feel safe. There was no such thing as safety. Not for her. She heard the elevator doors. She heard voices. One was Dante's, low and controlled. The other was Marco Gallo's, his underboss, his voice raised in agitation. They weren't in the office. They were in the main living area, and they weren't being quiet. "It's a problem, Dante," Marco said, his voice sharp. "The Romanos are pushing it hard. They're telling everyone you're harboring a traitor, that you're hiding Morelli's whore. They're saying she's a plant, that she got to you, that you've gone soft." Lena flinched, the words Morelli's whore striking her like a physical blow. "It's a lie, a negotiating tactic. They're testing me." Dante's voice was a low growl. "Are they?" Marco shot back. "Look at it. Dante, you bring this girl into your home, the one place nobody gets into. You start a war on the street for her. And she is, by her own admission, Morelli's woman. It's a setup. She plays the victim, you play the protector. And by the time you realize the knife is in your back, she's opening the gates for the whole Romano family." "She's not a plant," Dante said, his voice flat. "You don't know that. You're not thinking clearly. Get rid of her. Let me take her somewhere. One of the safe houses. We'll find out what she really knows. We'll sweat the truth out of her." A cold, primal fear, sharper than anything Morelli had ever inspired, seized Lena. Take her somewhere. Sweat the truth out of her. She knew what that meant. She was a loose end, a problem to be solved. There was a long, terrible silence. Then, Dante's voice, final as a coffin lid. "No, she stays. Here, with me. She's under my protection. You will not touch her. You will not speak of her like that again. That's all." Lena heard footsteps, heavy and angry. Marco Gallo appeared in the office doorway, on his way to the elevator. He saw her sitting in Dante's chair, small and pale, and his face twisted into a look of pure contempt. He didn't say a word. He just looked at her, and his eyes said it all. "You will be the death of him." The elevator doors chimed, and he was gone. She was alone. Dante was on the phone again, barking orders, his voice a low, furious river handling the fallout. She had to leave. She wasn't safe here. Dante's protection was a cage, and his own man saw her as a target. She couldn't be the reason he got killed. She couldn't be the problem that Marco got rid of. This was her chance. He was distracted. She grabbed her small, pathetic backpack, her sneakers. She couldn't use the elevator. It was keyed to his thumb. But a building this high? There had to be service stairs. She found the door near the kitchen, a heavy, unmarked steel plate. She put her hand on the bar. "Going somewhere?" She froze. He was standing right behind her, his voice devoid of all emotion. She hadn't even heard him approach. She turned, her backpack clutched to her chest like a shield. "Let me go." "No, I'm a problem. You heard him. I'm a whore, a plant, a traitor. Let me go, and I won't be your problem anymore." "And where will you go?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. He advanced on her. "Back to the street? You think you'd make it a block before Morelli's men or my own pick you up?" "That's my problem," she cried, her back hitting the cold steel of the door. "Not yours." He was on her in a second. He didn't hit her. He didn't shake her. He pinned her. He slammed his palms flat on the door on either side of her head, caging her. His body was a wall of heat and muscle. His face inches from hers. The sheer, contained power rolling off him was suffocating. "You're right," he said, his voice a low, ragged whisper. "It is my problem. You've been my problem since you ran out of that diner. But you're my problem. Dante, please." "Last night," he growled, his eyes searching hers. "You fell asleep in my arms. You held on to me. You kissed me back. Was any of that real, or was Marco right?" The question was a blade, the doubt in his eyes, the rare, raw vulnerability. It broke her. "No," she whispered, tears welling. "It was real. I don't know how to trust." "Then why are you running?" he demanded, his voice cracking with a frustration she hadn't known he possessed. "Why don't you trust me, Elena?" "Trust you?" she sobbed, the word tearing from her. How? How can I trust anyone? My entire life. I'm a dead woman. You don't understand. You don't understand what I did." She slid down the door, her legs giving out, and he followed her, dropping to one knee in front of her, his hands still on the door, still keeping her caged. "Then make me understand," he said, his voice softer now. "You told me. You saw him kill someone." "No," she cried, her hands fisting in her hair. "I didn't just see it. You don't get it. I'm not just a witness. I have proof. I fled with evidence." The air in the stairwell went utterly still. Dante's face, which had been a mask of raw emotion, went blank. It was a terrifying, cold blankness. "What evidence?" he asked, his voice a razor's edge. He was proud of it, Wesai, she whispered, the memory flooding back, making her shake. "He was in the back office of the trattoria. He was on a video call, and he was recording it. He said he was closing a deal. He had a man on his knees, and he shot him. He shot him, and he laughed, and he saved the file. He was drunk, and he left the room. I went in, I copied it, I put it on a flash drive. I don't know why. I needed something to make him let me go, or to make him pay. I ran that night. I took it." Dante was perfectly still. He looked like a statue carved from ice. "The man," he said, his voice a dead monotone. "The man he killed. Who was he?" "I don't know," she whispered. I heard Luca call him Antonio. He was mocking him. He said, 'Antonio, you shouldn't have skimmed from the Vescari, but they're too weak to do anything about it, so I'll do it for them.'" Lena didn't understand the change that came over him. He went pale, a grayish, sick pallor under his olive skin. He stood up, backing away from her slowly, one hand clenching and unclenching at his side. "Antonio," he repeated. The name was a stone in his mouth. "Dante?" she asked, getting to her feet. "What is it? Who was he?" "Antonio Vescari," Dante whispered, and the name echoed in the small, concrete space. "He was my cousin." The blood drained from Lena's face. No, he said, Luca said he was skimming. "From you." "My family," Dante said, his voice quiet, but filling with a cold, seismic rage that was more terrifying than any shouting. "They told me he was in a car accident. A drunk driver hit him. They told me. They held a funeral. They covered it up." He turned to look at her, and his eyes were not the eyes of the man who had held her. They were the eyes of a stranger, a killer. "My own family. They let my cousin's murder go unanswered. To avoid a war with the Romanos, the tension was a physical thing, a crushing weight. He was a bomb, and she had just lit the fuse. "Dante," she stammered, holding her hands out, as if to calm a wild animal. I'm so sorry. I didn't know." "Sorry," he laughed, a short, brutal sound that held no humor. He stalked toward her. She was the epicenter of his rage, the thing that had brought this all to his door. I can destroy it," she said, her voice trembling, backing away until she hit the wall again. "The flash drive, I'll get rid of it. We can pretend I never said." He grabbed her. His hands clamped onto her waist, hard, his fingers biting into her hips. He hauled her off her feet, slamming her body against his. "Get rid of it?" he growled, his face inches from hers, his eyes blazing with a terrifying, wild energy. "That flash drive is the only piece of truth left in this entire goddamn city. You didn't just bring me a problem, Elena. You brought me a war." His anger was a raw, physical force, but underneath it, tangled up in the betrayal and the rage, was the same dark, possessive longing from the night before. He was furious at his family, at the Romanos, at her for turning his world upside down, and he had never wanted her more. He kissed her. It wasn't a kiss. It was a collision. It was rough, angry, and desperate. It was a bruising, punishing claim, a kiss to silence her, to own her, to devour the truth she had just given him. His teeth scraped her lip, and she tasted the metallic tang of blood. She should have been terrified. But she was also so tired of being afraid. She met his rage with her own broken, desperate strength. Her hands came up, her fingers digging into the expensive fabric of his suit, and she kissed him back, a drowning woman taking her last breath. Later, the storm had passed. The rage had settled, not into calm, but into a cold, lethal resolve. Night had fallen. They were in the master bedroom, a vast, empty space. The city lights their only illumination. She was standing by the window, wearing one of his t-shirts, her small backpack at her feet. "He hurt you," Dante said. It wasn't a question. She flinched, her arms crossing over her body. "I don't know what you mean." "Morelli," he said, his voice flat. "He hurt you." She wouldn't look at him. "It doesn't matter. It matters to me." He crossed the room. She felt the heat of his body before he even touched her. He stood behind her, his presence a heavy weight. "Elena," he said, his voice softer. She turned. Her hands were shaking. "I'm scared. I know." She did something then. A small, brave act. She reached for him. Her hand, small and trembling, rested on the center of his chest, right over his heart. It was all the permission he needed. This time, it was slow. His anger was gone, replaced by a searing, focused intensity. He took her small, trembling hands in his, lacing his fingers with hers. He brought them to his lips, kissing her knuckles. He undressed her, gently. He slid his own t-shirt off her shoulders, letting it pool at her feet, and he saw them, the old bruises, faded, sickly, yellow and purple shadows on her ribs, a small, circular scar on her shoulder that looked like a burn, the ghosts of Luca Morelli's hands. He stopped, his breath hitching, his jaw clenched so hard she thought his teeth would break. Lena tried to cover herself, a sudden cold wave of shame washing over her. "Dante, don't. They're old. They don't." He caught her hands, gently, so gently. He held them at her sides, his eyes tracing the map of her old pain. Then he leaned down. He pressed his lips to the scar on her shoulder. A soft, warm, reverent kiss. Lena gasped, a small, wounded sound, a sob catching in her throat. He moved lower, his lips tracing the faded, ugly bruise on her ribs. "You are never," he murmured, his breath hot against her skin. "Going back to that life." He kissed the next mark, near her hip. "He will never," he whispered, "touch you again." Tears streamed down her face, silent and hot, but for the first time in her life, they weren't tears of fear or pain. They were tears of release. He lifted her, his hands spanning her small waist, and carried her to the massive, dark bed. He laid her on the sheets that probably cost more than her entire life's savings. He stood over her for a long moment, his dark eyes devouring her in the dim light of the city. He was the most dangerous man she had ever met, and she had never felt so safe. "From now on," he whispered, his voice thick with a possessiveness that felt like a shield. "You're mine to protect." The next morning, the city was shrouded in a pearl-gray mist, the penthouse floating in a sea of clouds. Lena woke up slowly, tangled in sheets that smelled impossibly of him, that dark, spicy scent and clean, expensive cotton. She was warm, for the first time in what felt like a lifetime. The ever-present hum of anxiety in her veins was silent. Dante was not in the bed. She heard the low murmur of his voice from the main living area, punctuated by the sharp, artificial cheer of a morning news program on the television. She sat up, pushing her tangled hair from her face, and slid out of the bed, finding his black t-shirt from the night before. She pulled it on. It fell to her mid-thigh, a ridiculously large, soft armor. She padded, barefoot, across the cold marble, her heart doing a strange, fluttering tap dance. She was terrified, not of him, but of this feeling, this fragile, dangerous sense of belonging. She found him in the kitchen, a black espresso cup in his hand, his back to her. He was in a fresh pair of black trousers and a crisp white shirt, his suit jacket slung over a chair. He was watching the wall-mounted television, his entire body radiating a tense, coiled energy. "Dante?" she said, her voice small. He didn't turn. His head just tilted slightly. "Don't come in here." The order was sharp, and it stopped her cold. The fragile bubble of warmth popped. "What is it?" she asked, her fear returning, a cold, familiar sickness. "Turn around, Elena, go back to the bedroom." "What's on the television?" she asked, her feet moving forward, disobeying him, drawn by the same morbid curiosity that made her look at the file. "I said no." She was in the archway now. She could see the screen. It was a local news segment. "Police are asking for the public's help in identifying a woman seen fleeing the scene of a downtown diner shooting." And then she saw her own face. It was a grainy still from the diner's security footage, the one Dante had. It was her, turning, her face pale and terrified, looking right at the camera. Her ghost identity, Lena Mendez, was gone. Her face was public. "Elena Costa," the news anchor read, her voice bright and professional. "A former employee of a Romano-affiliated restaurant is wanted for questioning as a material witness." Lena's breath left her. The world went silent. The anchor's voice replaced by a deafening, high-pitched ringing in her ears. Her knees buckled. "They know," she whispered. The floor was cold, but she was colder. They know my name. Luca, he'll find Sophia. Oh God, he'll find my sister." It wasn't a panic attack. It was a full-body collapse. Her lungs were concrete. She couldn't breathe. She was exposed. She was a target. She had just painted a giant, bloody bullseye on her sister's back. No, 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 no. She was rocking back and forth on the floor, her hands fisted in her hair. The television clicked off. The sudden silence was a violation. He was in front of her. He knelt, not touching her, his face a mask of granite. "Get up," he said. "He'll find her," she sobbed, not even looking at him. "It's my fault. I have to call her. I have to get up." His voice was a whip crack. She flinched, looking at him, her vision blurred with tears. His eyes were not cold. They were on fire. He was radiating a rage so pure and hot it was almost a visible thing. He did this," she choked out. "Luca, to flush me out." "Yes," Dante said. He reached out, not to comfort her, but to grab her. His hands closed on her upper arms, and he hauled her to her feet, his grip hard enough to bruise. He held her there, forcing her to stand, to meet his gaze. "You are panicking," he bit out, his voice a low, furious growl. "Stop. Crying won't make your sister safe. Crying won't make you invisible again. But what can I—" "You will be silent," he commanded, "and you will let me handle it. Do you understand me?" She stared at him, her sobs hitching in her chest, trapped by the sheer, unadulterated power in his gaze. "They made a mistake," he whispered, his eyes dark, his grip on her arms a painful, grounding pressure. "They think they exposed you. They think they made you a target. But all they did," his voice dropped, "a promise of violence, is give me a target of my own. They just signed their own death warrant." He let go of her, one hand coming up to cup her chin, his thumb swiping hard at the tear track on her cheek. "I will handle this. I will handle him. I swear to you, Elena, he will never touch your sister." And just like that, her panic, so vast and all-consuming, found a wall. His certainty, his rage, it was a shield, and she pressed herself against it. She nodded, a single jerky movement. He didn't smile. He didn't soften. He just nodded back. "Good, get dressed." "Something you can move in. Jeans? Sneakers?" "Not that." He gestured to the dress she had worn, still crumpled in a corner. "You have 10 minutes. He was already walking away, his phone to his ear before he'd even crossed the room. "Marco, get me a trace on the media leak. I don't care who you have to bribe. I want the name of the reporter, the cop, or the rat who gave them that photo. And I want a location on Luca Morelli, not where his men are, where he is. Now." Lena fled to the bedroom, her hands shaking, but for a different reason. The fear was still there, but it had a new, sharp edge, adrenaline. She tore through her small backpack, pulling out her only pair of jeans, a dark sweater, and her worn-out sneakers. When she emerged, he was at the massive dining table. It was covered in maps, in papers. He was a general planning a war. He was in the middle of a heated, low-voiced conversation with Marco. Not an option. He put her face on television. All deals are off. "I'm not negotiating. I'm ending this." Lena stood there, her hands clasped, feeling useless, a piece of baggage, the problem that had started all this. "Dante," she said, her voice surprisingly clear. He looked up, his eyes sharp, annoyed at the interruption. "The flash drive," she said. He froze. "The evidence, the video of Antonio. You're planning a takedown, but you're doing it as a gangster, as revenge. But I have the proof, the thing that makes it, not just your word against his, the thing that could, I don't know, clear your family, the thing that could end him." "Where is it?" he asked, his voice flat. "I hid it," she said, her chin lifting. "Before I went to work at the diner, when I first got to this city, I rented a storage unit, a 5x5 box. I paid for a year in cash, under a fake name, Jane Smith. It's taped to the underside of a metal shelf inside." Dante was very still. "A storage unit, where?" "West Side, near the warehouses. It's not a good neighborhood." "Marco," Dante said into the phone. "I'll call you back." He hung up, his eyes never leaving hers. "I'll send my men. You'll give them the key." "No," Lena said. He raised an eyebrow. "There is no key. It's a combination lock. I'm the only one who knows the number. And I'm not giving it to you. You're not—" He started to rise, a low growl in his chest. "I'm not going to be the girl you hide in a tower." "Dante," she said, her voice shaking, but she held her ground. "I've been hiding for 8 months, and it got me nowhere. It just got my face on television. This is my evidence. My weapon. I'm not handing it over. I'm coming with you." "Absolutely not. It's a death sentence." "Staying here is a death sentence," she argued, her voice rising. "You're at war. You said it yourself." "What happens if I'm here, and your men are busy, and Marco decides I'm a problem to be handled? What happens if Morelli's men find a way in? At least if I'm with you. I know where the gun is." He stared at her, a long, hard look, assessing her. He saw the terror in her eyes, but he also saw the steel it was wrapped in. She wasn't the shaking, broken girl from the diner. Not anymore. "I go with you," he said, his voice final. "Not my men. Me. You and me. No one else. No one knows where we're going. That's the only way." "Okay," she breathed. "And you will do exactly, and only, as I say," he added, grabbing his suit jacket and pulling a heavy, black firearm from a drawer, which he tucked into the waistband at the small of his back. "Or I will lock you in that bathroom and go myself." "I understand. You don't," he said. "But you're about to." The drive to the west side was thick with a tension so heavy it was hard to breathe. Dante drove the Bentley, not the armored Escalade, wanting to blend, though the Bentley blended in this neighborhood about as well as a diamond in a mud puddle. The car was silent, save for the hum of the engine and the sound of Lena's ragged breathing. He parked 2 blocks away from the storage facility. "Stay here," he said. "Dante, no, I have to—" "You will stay in the car. I will go to the unit. You will give me the number. I will retrieve the drive. That is the end of the discussion." He was already out of the car. She watched him walk, his body a paradigm of controlled, lethal power, his head scanning, his hand never far from the back of his jacket. He disappeared inside the corrugated metal building. Lena sat in the car, her hands locked on her knees. Every second was an eternity. Every person who walked by was a threat. Every car that slowed was an assassin. He was gone for 3 minutes. It felt like 3 years. He reappeared, walking fast, not running. He got into the car, his face impassive. He tossed a tiny, black flash drive into her lap. "This," he said, "is worth more than my entire organization." He started the car. He was merging onto the freeway, getting up to speed. When it happened, a black, windowless van that had been 2 cars behind them suddenly accelerated, its engine roaring. It slammed into their back right bumper. The impact was a sonic boom. Lena screamed as the Bentley, a 2-ton machine, spun like a toy. Metal shrieked, glass spiderwebbed. The world became a violent, dizzying blur of gray sky and black asphalt. Dante fought the wheel, his arms rigid, his face a mask of furious concentration. "Hold on!" They spun twice, coming to a screeching halt in the middle of the freeway, facing the wrong direction. The van had stopped. 2 men were piling out, guns raised. "Down!" Dante roared. He didn't unbuckle. He grabbed her by the back of the neck and shoved her head down, hard, below the dashboard. "Stay." "Down?" The sound of gunfire was deafening, a rapid, popping crack, crack, crack that was so different from the movies. It was flat, ugly, and terrifying. The side window of the Bentley exploded in a shower of tempered glass, raining down on Lena's back. She screamed, a muffled sound against the floor mat. Dante was moving. He had his own gun. He wasn't firing wildly. He was calm. He was working. 3 shots, pop, 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 measured. Economical. Then silence. A car door opened. Not hers. His. "Dante, no," she cried, but her voice was a whisper. She heard a shout, another single, final pop. The silence that followed was absolute. "Elena!" His voice. She looked up, her body shaking so hard she couldn't control it. He was standing outside the car, his gun still in his hand, pointed down. 2 men were on the pavement, dark, crumpled shapes. They were not moving. "Get out," he said, his voice ragged. "Now." A black sedan, one she hadn't noticed, was pulling up behind them. A shadow car. When he had lied, he had backup. Thank God, he had lied. He pulled her from the wrecked Bentley, his hands checking her. "Looking for blood." "Are you hit?" "No." "You? Are you—" "I'm fine. Get in the car." He pushed her toward the sedan, its back door already open. She was halfway in when she looked at her dress, her jeans, her sweater. She was wearing the clothes she'd put on that morning, but there was a splash of blood on the sleeve of her dark sweater, a bright, arterial red. It wasn't hers. She looked at Dante. He was fine. He wasn't hit. It was the attackers. One of the men he had shot. The blood had sprayed. The reality of it, the sheer visceral filth of the violence, hit her. The world tilted. She wasn't going to be sick. She was just going to turn off. "Elena!" She heard his voice as if from a great distance, and then the world went black. She woke to the smell of hay and old wood. She was on a soft bed, in a small, rustic room. A quilt, heavy and smelling of cedar, was tucked around her. She sat up. Her sweater was gone. She was in the t-shirt again. The door opened. Dante stood there, and he looked exhausted. His white shirt was rumpled, his hair a mess. He wasn't the Viscari boss. He was just a man. "Where are we?" she whispered. "A farmhouse. Belongs to an old ally. We're 2 hours outside the city. No one will find us here." The men. "Dealt with," he said, his voice flat. She looked down at her hands. She was trembling, the image of the blood on her sleeve, the sound of the glass. I, she started, but she couldn't form the words. The trauma was a physical thing, a ball of ice in her stomach. She started to shake, the deep, rattling tremors from the night he'd found her. Dante watched her, his jaw clenching. He crossed the room and sat on the edge of the bed. He didn't touch her. "It's over," he said. "No, it's not," she whispered. I can't get the sound out of my head, the glass and the blood. It was on me." She was hyperventilating now, her hands clutching the quilt. Dante's face was a war. He was a man of violence, but he was seeing, for the first time, what his world did to someone who was not from it. He stood. "Come on." He led her to a small adjoining bathroom. It was old-fashioned, with a deep, claw-foot tub. Steam was already rising from it. He had run her a bath. "Take off the shirt," he said, his voice soft. She fumbled with the hem, her fingers numb. He brushed her hands away, his own touch surprisingly gentle, and lifted the t-shirt over her head. He didn't look at her body, not with desire. He was looking at her face, at the raw terror in her eyes. He guided her to the tub and she stepped in. The hot water a blessed, stinging shock. She sank down, the water rising to her chin. Dante knelt by the tub. He picked up the washcloth, and he began to bathe her. His hands, the same hands that had just killed 2 men, the same hands that held a gun with such steady, lethal precision, were trembling. She saw it. His knuckles were white on the washcloth, his movements stiff, almost clumsy. He wasn't trembling from fear. He was trembling from her. He washed her arms, her shoulders, his touch a careful, reverent thing. He was washing away the blood that wasn't there. He was washing away the glass, the gunpowder, the memory. He was trying to wash away his own world from her skin. She just watched him. Tears, hot and silent, streaming down her face, falling into the bathwater. He didn't speak. He just washed her, his movements slow, his jaw tight, and when he was done, he stood, his back to her, and held up a thick white towel. "Come out," she stood, the water sluicing off her, and wrapped the towel around her body. He carried her back to the bed. He laid her down and pulled the quilt up. He sat on the edge, just watching her. As the light in the small room faded to dusk, the silence was thick, not with tension, but with unspoken, raw emotion. She reached her hand out from under the quilt and placed it on his. His skin was warm. He looked at their hands, his large, calloused one, hers, small and pale, resting on top. He turned his hand over and laced his fingers with hers. "Elena," he said, his voice rough. "Dante," she whispered. This time, when they came together, it was not with the desperate, anchoring hunger of the penthouse. It was not the angry, possessive claiming of the office. It was slow. It was a silent conversation. His hands on her skin were not a claim, they were a question. His lips on hers were not a demand, they were a promise. He moved with a deliberate, aching tenderness, as if she were a priceless, broken thing he was trying to put back together. And she met his tenderness with her own, her hands tracing the hard lines of his face, her body arching to meet his. A silent yes. It was a quiet, desperate plea for life in a day that had been so full of death. Later, she was asleep, her breathing deep and even, her face, for the first time since he'd met her, completely at peace. Dante sat in the chair by the window, the farmhouse dark and silent around him. He hadn't slept. He held the small, black flash drive in his hand, feeling the weight of it. He looked at her, at the way the moonlight painted her skin in shades of silver and white. She was beautiful. She was brave. And she was going to be the death of him. He knew what this flash drive meant. He knew what protecting her meant. It wasn't brave, just a takedown of Luca Morelli anymore. This was a war against the entire Romano syndicate, and a purge of his own family. His jaw clenched, the muscle jumping in the dark. He had ignited a war, all for the small, sleeping woman in the bed. He looked at her, and he knew, with a terrifying, absolute certainty, that he would burn the whole world down to keep her safe. The drive back to the city was a silent, 80-mile-per-hour funeral procession. They had left the farmhouse, the temporary sanctuary, before dawn. Lena sat in the passenger seat of the new black sedan, the tiny black flash drive heavy in the palm of her hand. Dante drove, his face a mask of carved granite. The tender, trembling man who had bathed her, who had held her through the night, was gone. In his place was the Vescari boss, a man steeling himself for what he was about to see. They didn't speak. There was nothing to say that the small, plastic chip in her hand had not already screamed. They returned to the penthouse. The sun was just beginning to cut through the gray morning mist, and the city below looked innocent, asleep. Dante led her straight to his office. He didn't turn on the lights. He walked to his desk, powered on a sleek silver laptop, one that Lena noted was not connected to any network, and held out his hand. She placed the flash drive in his palm. Their fingers brushed. His skin was cold. He inserted the drive, clicked a single file. The video was exactly as she remembered, and 1,000 times worse. It was grainy, shot on a phone. The audio tinny and sharp. It was the back room of Luca Morelli's restaurant. She saw him, Antonio Vescari. He was on his knees, his face bloody, his suit torn. Luca Morelli was standing over him, younger, his face flushed with arrogance and cheap wine. He was holding a pistol, gesturing with it as he spoke. "You Vescari," Luca sneered on the recording. "You think you own everything. You think you can just take. But your family won't even come for you. They're too scared of us. Antonio, too weak. My family will end you," Antonio choked out, blood on his lips. Luca laughed, a high-pitched barking sound that made Lena's stomach clench. "No, your family is going to pay us to make this go away." He aimed the pistol. Lena flinched, her eyes squeezing shut, but she forced them open. She had to bear witness with him. The gunshot was a flat, ugly sound. Antonio collapsed, a puppet with its strings cut. But the video didn't end. The person holding the phone laughed, and the lens panned. Lena saw 2 other Romano associates in the room, men she recognized. They were smiling. One of them raised a glass. They were toasting the murder. They were laughing as Dante's cousin bled out on the dirty floor. Dante's hand moved, and the laptop screen went black. The silence in the office was absolute. It was a suffocating, pressurized void. Lena sat, frozen, watching his back. He was perfectly, unnaturally still. She couldn't see his face, only the rigid line of his shoulders. "Dante," she whispered, her voice a thin thread. He didn't move for 10 seconds, 20. When he finally turned, his face was not the face she knew. All warmth, all anger, all emotion had been scoured from it. What was left was a terrifying, cold calm. It was the calm of a deep, Arctic ocean, a stillness that promised death to anything that fell into it. He was 24 years old, Dante said, his voice flat, devoid of any inflection. He had a son, a wife. He walked to the intercom on his desk. "Marco, get the capos. My office. 5 minutes." Within 10 minutes, the room was full. Marco Gallo, his underboss, stood at his right hand. 3 other men, older, with hard, scarred faces, filled the chairs. They were the inner circle. Lena was still there, a ghost in the corner. No one looked at her. "For 3 years, Dante began, his voice still that terrible, dead monotone. "I have been told my cousin Antonio died in a car accident. A drunk driver." The men shifted, their expressions unreadable. "That was a lie." Dante turned the laptop around. He played the video. He made them watch. When the screen went black, the room was silent. One of the older men crossed himself, his face pale. Marco Gallo was the first to speak, his voice a low, furious growl. They laughed, the Romano pigs. They laughed." "Yes," Dante said. They laughed, and Luca Morelli pulled the trigger. He paused, letting the weight of the disrespect, the ultimate sin in their world, settle. And my family, Dante continued, his voice dropping. The old guard, my father, my uncles, they knew. They buried it. They chose peace with the Romanos over justice for their own blood. They sold his life to keep the trade routes open. That was the second bomb. The room exploded. Traditori, one of the capos spat. Betrayers. They spat on the Vescari name, Marco roared, his face purple. This is an insult that can only be answered one way. We burn them. We burn the Romanos to the ground, and we purge our own house. Dante held up a hand. The silence was immediate. We will not be driven by rage, Dante said, his voice cutting through the anger. We will be driven by justice. This is not a war. It is an execution. He turned to a map of the city. Gallo, you will take your men and you will hit their shipping containers at the port. I want them crippled. Franco, the warehouses on the west side, burn them. Rico, I want Luca Morelli. I want his car, his clubs, his safe houses. I want everything he owns in ashes, but I want him alive. He belongs to me. The men nodded. A grim, unified force. They were readying for war, leaving the office to rally their crews. Lena was left alone in the room, the sound of their angry, plodding voices fading down the hall. She was shaking, her body cold. This was it. The war she had been running from, her burner phone, the one she kept for her sister, vibrated in her jeans pocket. She fumbled for it, her hands numb. It was Sophia. Lena? Her sister's voice was a high-pitched, terrified squeak. Sophia, what's wrong? Are you safe? No, oh God, Lena, no, I was at the library. I came back. There were men. They had your picture, the one from the news. They were asking the dorm manager about me. They knew my name. Lena, they knew my name. Lena's blood turned to ice. Where are you? Talk to me. Sophia, I'm in the basement storage room of the science building. I'm hiding. I'm so scared. They were Vescari men. Lena, no, not Vescari. The other ones. Romano. They're hunting her. Dante had re-entered the office. His conversation with his capos finished. He saw her face, white as chalk, her eyes wide with a terror that dwarfed everything else. Dante, she sobbed, clutching the phone. They're at her university. Luca, he sent his men. They're hunting Sophia. They have her name. They're... Oh God, he's going to kill her to get to me. She launched herself at him, her fists beating uselessly against his chest, her control shattering into a million pieces. You have to help her. Please, you have to save her. I don't care about me. I don't care about the drive. Just save my sister. The Vescari boss vanished. Dante grabbed her by the wrists, his grip iron. Stop. He took the phone from her hand. Sophia, this is Dante Vescari. You are going to be silent. You are going to stay exactly where you are. I have men 10 minutes from your location. They will be there. You will hear a knock. 3 short, 1 long. You will not come out for any other reason. Do you understand me? He didn't wait for an answer. He was already on his own phone. Franco, forget the warehouses. Your orders are canceled. I have a new priority. The State University. The sister, her name is Sophia Costa. She's in the basement of the science building. I want 2 teams, full tactical. You extract her. You bring her here. You use the service tunnels, and you use the armored car. If anyone gets in your way, you put them down. You have 1 hour. Go. He hung up. Lena was staring at him, her breath coming in ragged, painful gasps. She was shaking her head, the tears streaming down her face. This is my fault. All of it. I came here. I showed you the video. I put your family. I put my sister. I brought all this death to your doorstep. She crumpled, her legs giving out, but he caught her, his arms wrapping around her, holding her up. He pulled her tight against his chest, one hand tangling in her hair, holding her head to his shoulder. No, he said, his voice a low, rough rumble against her ear. He held her for a long minute, just letting her cry, her sobs muffled against his expensive suit. He didn't shush her. He just held her. He was an anchor in her hurricane. When her sobs quieted to shaky, hitching breaths, he pulled back, just enough. He cupped her chin, his large, warm hand tilting her tear-stained face up to his. "My doorstep," he said, his voice thick, "has always been full of shadows. Elena, my world has always been full of death. You didn't bring me this darkness." His thumb brushed a tear from her cheek. "You brought me light. You brought me the truth. You walked into my house of lies and you burned it down. You gave me a reason to be better than them. You didn't bring me death. You brought me... The raw, unguarded confession hung in the air, more shocking than any gunshot. The pressure in the room was unbearable. Outside the office door, his men were preparing for war. His family was in chaos. Her sister was being hunted, and they were in the eye of the storm. This small, quiet office, which had become their entire world. She was trembling, not from cold, but from the sheer, overwhelming, terrifying emotion, fear for Sophia, terror of Luca, and a deep, aching, desperate need for the man standing in front of her. He was trembling, too. She could feel it in the hand that was still cupping her face. He was vibrating with adrenaline, with controlled rage, with a fierce, primal possessiveness. "They're going to try and kill us, aren't they?" she whispered. Her eyes locked on his. "No," he said, his voice a guttural promise. "I am going to kill them." And in that second, the fear and the desire, the terror and the passion fused. They became the same thing. He didn't kiss her. She kissed him. She rose on her toes, her hands fisting in his shirt, and pulled his mouth down to hers. It was not a kiss of tenderness. It was a kiss of desperation. It was a kiss that said, "I am terrified, and you are the only solid thing in the world." He responded with a low growl, a sound of frustrated rage and savage need. His arms crushed her to him, his mouth taking hers, hard, ravenous. This was not the gentle lover from the farmhouse. This was the mafia boss, the man who had just declared war, and he was claiming her, marking her, promising her that he would not, could not, lose her. He backed her up, his body a relentless, hot wall, until her legs hit the hard edge of his desk. His hands were everywhere, in her hair, on her face, his palms sliding under her sweater, his skin hot against her back. It wasn't gentle. It was frantic. It was a man imprinting himself on her, a woman clinging to her only protector. She dug her nails into his shoulders, anchoring herself as he kissed her, a deep, bruising kiss that tasted of fear and promises. A phone, sharp and insistent, buzzed on the desk. The sound shattered the moment. They sprang apart, breathing hard, their eyes wild. Dante snatched the phone. "What?" Lena watched his face. "She's in the car. They're 2 blocks out. They're clear." Lena sagged against the desk, her legs turning to water. "She's safe. She's safe," he confirmed, his voice rough. He ran a hand through his hair, his composure returning, the boss slotting back into place. "Stay here. I'm going to meet them. Get her settled in the guest wing. Lock this door. Don't open it for anyone but me." He was gone. Lena locked the door, her heart still a frantic drum. She paced the office, from the desk to the window, watching the city below, feeling like a prisoner in her gilded cage. She heard the elevator chime, heard the low murmur of voices, Dante and his men, Marco Gallo. She watched, unseen, through the crack of the office door. The men were gathered by the living room window, looking at the maps again. Marco Gallo, however, stepped away. He moved toward the terrace, his back to the room, and pulled out his phone. Lena's blood ran cold. It was nothing. He was just making a call. But her instincts, the ones that had kept her alive for 8 months, were screaming. He was shielding his phone with his body. His voice was a low, secretive murmur. He spoke for less than 10 seconds, then snapped the phone shut, glanced over his shoulder, and shoved it in his pocket. He looked guilty. He looked the way Luca's men looked when they were lying. The office door opened, and she jumped. It was Dante. "Sophia's in the guest room," he said. "She's terrified, but she's safe. He stopped. He saw her face. "What is it?" I don't know," she stammered. It's probably nothing. I'm paranoid. Elena, what is it? It's Marco, she whispered. He just made a call. He was hiding it. He was being secretive. Dante, he looked wrong. Dante's face hardened. He wanted to dismiss it. Marco was his blood, his right hand, the man who had just roared for vengeance. But he looked at Lena. Her instincts had been right about the diner, right about Luca, right about the flash drive. He hates me, she said, the realization hitting her. When you weren't looking, the way he looks at me like I'm poison. Dante said nothing. He walked past her, to the office door, and looked out at his underboss, who was now joking with the other men. All trace of secrecy gone. Stay here, Dante said, his voice quiet. Lock the door. He walked out of the office. He didn't stride. He prowled. The storm that had been threatening all day finally broke. The sky opened up, rain lashing against the glass walls of the penthouse. Dante walked straight past his men and onto the vast, open-air terrace. "Marco!" he called, his voice cutting through the rising wind. Marco looked surprised, but he followed, jogging to catch up. "Boss, we should be—" The rain was coming down in sheets, plastering their hair to their heads, soaking their suits in seconds. "Give me your phone," Dante said. Marco froze, the rain dripping from his nose. "What? Boss, we don't have time for—" "Give me your phone?" "Dante," Marco laughed, a false, nervous sound. "It's that girl, isn't it? She's got you seeing shadows. She was right about Antonio," Dante said, his voice a low, deadly rumble. "She was right about the cover-up. And she's right about you." Marco's face changed. The facade dropped. The desperation was there, and then the rage. "You're weak," he spat. "You let a piece of trash, a Romano whore, tell you how to run your family. I built this with you. And you betrayed it," Dante said. "You knew about Antonio. You knew, and you let it happen. You let my family pay them. You were part of it. It was business," Marco roared over the wind. "A deal, one that would have made us rich. And you let her ruin it. You're throwing it all away for nothing." "She's not nothing," Marco lunged. It was not a fight. It was a betrayal. He came at Dante with a knife, a thin, glittering blade that he'd had hidden. But Dante was faster. He'd been expecting it. He sidestepped the lunge, grabbing Marco's wrist, and drove his elbow into Marco's face. The sound of breaking cartilage was a sick, wet crack. Marco staggered, but he was a brawler. He came back, swinging wildly. Dante was a surgeon. He met Marco's wild rage with cold, brutal precision, a punch to the throat, a knee to the ribs. The fight was ugly. Slick with rain and blood, they crashed against the glass barrier, the city lights a chaotic smear below them. Dante slammed Marco against the parapet, his forearm crushing his windpipe. Marco clawed at him, his eyes wide and panicked. "Why?" Dante roared, his face inches from his, the rain mixing with the blood on his knuckles. "You were my brother," Marco choked, a terrible, gurgling sound. You chose her." Dante hit him. One last, devastating blow to the temple. Marco Gallo, his underboss, his brother, collapsed, a dead weight on the rain-slicked stone. Dante stood over him, heaving, the storm raging around him, his heart a cold, dead stone in his chest. You're too late." Marco was still alive. He was on his back, laughing, his mouth full of blood and rain. "You think you won?" He coughed. Dante grabbed the front of his shirt, hauling him up. "What did you do?" My call was just to make you busy." Marco's bloody smile was horrific. "The real call was made 10 minutes ago. From a burner, you can't stop it." "Stop what?" Dante shook him, the rage returning, white-hot. Marco's eyes, full of a traitor's victory, looked past Dante, toward the penthouse doors, where Lena, her face pale, was watching. "They're already here. Dante," he whispered, his voice failing. "They're in the elevator. They're on the roof. They're coming for her." As if summoned by his words, a high-pitched electronic wail cut through the sound of the storm. The penthouse alarms. Red lights began to flash, painting the rain-soaked terrace in blood. The alarm was a high-pitched, electronic scream that cut through the thunder. Red lights flashed, strobing the rain-soaked terrace, painting Marco's bloody, laughing face in pulses of crimson. They're coming for her. Dante Vescari didn't waste a second. He left his traitor, his brother, to drown in the rain. He burst back into the penthouse, his gun in his hand, his eyes scanning, not for the enemy, but for her. The world exploded. The floor-to-ceiling glass walls, the very thing that made the penthouse a palace, became its greatest weakness. A hail of automatic gunfire erupted from the roof opposite, and the entire north wall of the living room disintegrated in a tidal wave of shattered glass and rain. Lena screamed, a sound swallowed by the chaos. "Elena!" Dante roared. He was a force of nature, a dark, focused cyclone in the midst of the storm. He was already moving, grabbing her from the office doorway, his body a solid shield. "Sophia, guest wing, now!" He dragged Lena, pulling her through the hurricane of noise and debris. The air was thick with the smell of gunpowder and the ozone from the storm. Another volley of shots tore through the kitchen, a high-pitched ping as bullets ripped through the stainless steel. He kicked open the door to the guest wing. Sophia was huddled in the hallway, her hands over her ears, her face a mask of pure, catatonic terror. "The panic room," Dante bellowed. He shoved a heavy, ornate bookshelf. It moved, scraping on the floor, revealing a solid steel door set flush with the wall. He punched in a code. The door hissed open. "Get in, Sophia, go!" He shoved the girl inside the small, dark, concrete-lined room. "Lena, in!" He was trying to push her, his eyes on the hallway, his gun up. "No!" Lena planted her feet, her sneakers skidding on the marble. "I'm not leaving you!" "Elena, this is not a discussion," he roared, grabbing her arm, trying to force her into the safety of the room. "She's right," a new voice sneered from the main hall. 3 Romano men, dressed in black, tactical gear, were advancing down the hallway. They had come up the stairs. Dante didn't hesitate. He shoved Lena flat against the wall, his body covering hers, and returned fire. Pop, pop, 2 measured shots. One of the men went down, but the second man was already firing. Dante saw the muzzle flash. He saw the bullet's path, aimed not at him, but at Lena, the woman he was shielding. He moved. He roared, a sound of pure, primal rage, and threw his body fully in front of hers, shoving her toward the panic room just as the bullet hit. It was a wet, heavy thud. Dante grunted, a sound of pained surprise, his body slamming into the wall. He didn't fall. He just slid, his back scraping against the plaster, his face a mask of sudden, shocking pain. "Dante!" Lena screamed. He'd been hit. A dark, flowering stain was spreading across his side, his white shirt turning crimson. "Get in the room," he gasped. His teeth gritted. As he raised his gun with a shaking hand, Lena stared at the blood. She stared at the man who had just taken a bullet for her. The terror that had defined her entire life was still there. A high-pitched, screaming whine in her ears. But something else rose to meet it, a cold, clear, silver-sharp rage. The man who had shot Dante was reloading, smiling. Dante's shot went wide. He was in pain. A black pistol, dropped by the man Dante had shot first, lay on the marble floor, just 2 feet away. Lena didn't think. She moved. She scrambled on her hands and knees, snatching the heavy, cold metal. It was shockingly heavy. The Romano man saw her. He raised his weapon. Lena screamed, a sound torn from her soul, and she pointed the gun with 2 shaking hands. She didn't aim. She just pointed at the threat, at the man who had hurt him, and pulled the trigger. Click. The safety. The side, Dante choked out from the floor. Her thumb fumbled, finding the small lever. She pushed it. The man was laughing. She raised the gun again and pulled the trigger. And again. And again. The sound was deafening. The recoil slammed her shoulder. But she didn't let go. She emptied the clip, her eyes squeezed half shut, screaming as she fired. When the clicks were empty, she was still pulling the trigger. She opened her eyes. The man was on the floor. He was not moving. Lena dropped the gun. It clattered to the marble. She was shaking so hard she collapsed, her hands covered in a fine mist of... She didn't want to know. "Elena?" Dante whispered. He was pale, his eyes closing. "No, no, no, Dante!" She crawled to him, her hands hovering over the wound. You can't. The elevator dinged. Lena's heart stopped. More. They were surrounded. The doors slid open, and 5 men in Vascari suits poured out, guns up. They were not the men from before. These were new faces, hard faces. "Boss," one of them yelled, seeing Dante on the floor. "Secure the penthouse," the leader roared. "Franco, the girl, get her." "No," Lena shrieked, shielding Dante's body. "Signora," the man said, his voice surprisingly gentle. He had a southern accent. "We're the Allies, from New Orleans. He called us. We're here to help. He's shot," she sobbed. We've got him," the man, Franco, said. "My men will clear the building. We're getting you out. We're getting you all out." They moved with brutal, terrifying efficiency. They were on Dante, applying pressure to the wound. 2 more men extracted a still screaming Sophia from the panic room. Lena was hauled to her feet, her legs like water. "Where's Marco?" one of them asked. "He's the one who let them in," Lena whispered, her voice numb. The men's faces went dark. "The boss will deal with him," Franco said, his voice cold. They were bundled into a private armored service elevator, leaving the penthouse as a war zone, the sound of gunfire still echoing from the floors below. 2 days later, Dante was sitting in a dark, leather chair, his arm in a sling, his side wrapped so tightly he could barely breathe. He was high on painkillers, but his eyes were clear, cold. He'd been stitched up by a private doctor in a secure, Vascari-owned apartment. Lena had not left his side. She'd cleaned the wound, she'd fed him the pills, she'd held his hand, in silence, as he stared at the wall. Processing the dual betrayal of his family and his friend, Sophia was safe, in another location, guarded by 3 of the New Orleans men. Now, it was time for the end. The confrontation was not at a Vascari estate. It was at a Romano warehouse, one of cold concrete and high, steel rafters, the smell of fish and diesel fuel hanging in the air. Dante had called for a parley. The old guard of the Romano family was there. 3 older men, their faces like wrinkled leather, their eyes cold and suspicious. And in the center, flanked by his men, was Luca Morelli. He was wearing a $1,000 suit, a smug, triumphant smirk on his face. "Dante," he called out, his voice echoing in the vast space. "You look unwell. I heard you had some trouble at your home. Pests." Dante just stood there, leaning slightly on a cane, his bad arm immobile. Lena stood beside him. She was not hiding. She was wearing black jeans and a dark sweater, her hair pulled back, her face pale but set in a mask of hard-won resolve. She was holding a laptop. "You're here to surrender?" Luca laughed. "To give me what's mine." He leered at Lena. "She was always my property." Dante's hand tightened on his cane, but he didn't speak. He just looked at Lena. He nodded. "Once." "He says I was his property." Lena's voice, clear and cold, rang out in the warehouse. "He says I was his, but he forgot to mention what he did." "Shut up, you—" Luca started. "Now," Lena said. A massive white projector screen rolled down from the rafters. A projector, which one of Dante's men had set up, whirred to life, and the video played. It was 20 feet high. Antonio Vascari's bloody, terrified face, Luca's smug, laughing one. The sound was tinny, but deafening in the silence of the warehouse. "You think you can just—" "Take," Luca's voice echoed, ghostly and young. "But your family won't even come for you. They're too weak." The Romano old guard, who had been sneering, froze. Their faces went from arrogance to confusion, and then to a cold, dawning horror. On the screen, Luca aimed the pistol. The gunshot, in the enclosed space, was like a cannon blast. Antonio collapsed. The men on the video, Romano men, toasted the murder. Lena didn't stop the video. She let it play. She let them all watch. Luca Morelli was no longer smiling. He was pale, his eyes darting to the men beside him. "It's fake. It's a trick. A Vascari lie. A lie." One of the Romano capos, an old man named Pietro, said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. He was looking at his fellow Romanos, not at Dante. He murdered a Vescari, he murdered family, and he lied to us. He told us Antonio Vaccarsi died in an accident. He started a war for sport. The betrayal was not Dante's. It was Luca's. He had broken every rule. He had murdered a maidman from a rival family without sanction, and then lied to his own. He has brought ruin on our house. Pietro spat. The shift was magnetic. The Romanos, who had been standing with Luca, stepped away from him. You're taking his side? Luca shrieked, his composure gone. He's the enemy. You, Pietro said, are the poison. Luca saw it. The end. He did the only thing a cornered rat could do. He pulled his own gun. He didn't aim for the old men. He aimed for Lina. You, he screamed. You did this. He fired, but Dante, even injured, was faster. He moved, roaring, shoving Lina to the ground, his cane clattering away. He was too far to stop the bullet, but he didn't need to. A dozen gunshots echoed in the warehouse, but none of them were Dante's. Pietro and the other Romano capos had drawn their own weapons. They unloaded on Luca Morelli. He was hit once, twice, a dozen times. He collapsed, his expensive suit ruined, his eyes wide with a final, stupid surprise. It was over. Pietro looked at Dante, who was already on the ground, helping Lina up, his hands checking her, frantic. The girl is unharmed, Pietro said, his voice heavy. He holstered his pistol. The betrayal is dealt with. The Vescari family, and ours. We have no more quarrel. Your family will be cleared. Dante just nodded, his hand tangled in Lina's hair, his forehead pressed to hers. He didn't care about the Romanos. He didn't care about the war. He just held her, breathing her in, his body shaking with adrenaline and relief. Weeks later, the penthouse was quiet. The glass was new, the marble polished, the smell of gunpowder long gone. The sun streamed in, bright and clear. Dante Vescari was in the master bed, propped up on a mountain of pillows. His side was healing, but the recovery was slow. The doctors insisted Lina had been there, every day. She had managed his affairs, with the help of Franco from New Orleans, who was now his acting underboss. She had spoken to his capos. She had taken care of her sister, who was now safe in a university in another state, under a new, Vescari-protected identity. Lina had changed. The terrified, haunted ghost from the diner was gone. She moved with a quiet, certain confidence. She was no longer running. She was home. She had fallen asleep in the chair by his bed, her head resting on her arm, her other hand resting, lightly, on his chest. Dante woke, not from pain but from peace. He had been watching her sleep for 10 minutes. He looked at her, at the soft curve of her cheek, at the relaxed, steady rise and fall of her breath. She was the most beautiful, terrifying, and real thing he had ever known. He was the most powerful man in the city, and he was, completely and utterly, hers. He reached out, his hand brushing a strand of hair from her face. His voice was a low, rough whisper. "Elena," she stirred, her eyes fluttering open, warm and soft and free of fear. He smiled, a small, slow smile that was just for her. "Tell me the truth," he whispered, his voice thick with an emotion that still felt new. "Are you mine now?" Lina looked at him. She saw the man who had terrified her, the man who had saved her, the man who had taken a bullet for her, the man who had burned his own world down to make a place for her. A slow, bright smile, one he had never seen before, spread across her face. Her eyes filled with tears, but they were not tears of sorrow. She nodded, a single, definitive, happy movement. "Yes," she whispered, her voice full of tears and laughter. "Yes, I am." He leaned in, and she met him halfway. They kissed, and for the first time, it was not a kiss of fear, or of desperation, or of passion born from chaos. It was not a kiss of a boss and his witness. It was a kiss of a man and a woman, in their own home. It was quiet. It was slow. It was the kiss of two people who were, finally, safe. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I hope you enjoyed the journey with Dante and Lena. Where in the world are you listening from? I would love to know. Please drop a comment and tell me. And if you love stories like this, filled with passion, danger, and romance, please consider subscribing to Mafia Romance Stories. Your support means the world, and I cannot wait to share the next story with you. Please share your thoughts in the comments.